The air is thick with the scent of incense and myrrh, a haze of fragrant smoke curling towards the sky. You stand in the temple courtyard, the sandstone walls around you bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Your linen robes cling to your skin, damp with sweat from long hours spent in preparation for this moment. The priests and priestesses have all withdrawn, leaving you alone to await her. The silence presses down on you like a weight. Somewhere in the distance, the Nile hums its eternal song. But here, in this sacred place, all is still. You can feel the ancient stones beneath your feet vibrating faintly, as though the earth itself is trembling in anticipation for her arrival. Isis, the Great Mother, the Queen of Heaven, Goddess of magic and life. She is the one who resurrected Osiris, the one who weeps for the dead and watches over the living. And now, for reasons you still cannot fully comprehend, she has called for you. The temple was not your destination, it was your fate. The high priest had looked at you with eyes full of something like fear when you told him of your vision, but he had not questioned it. He knew better than to doubt the will of Isis. Now, standing in the sacred courtyard, the weight of your calling settles deep into your bones. You are here to serve, to offer yourself in whatever way she requires. The sun finally dips below the horizon, and the temple is plunged into shadow. The cool of night rushes in, but it doesn't bring you relief. Instead, the air crackles with a strange, invisible energy, as if the very atmosphere is alive. Then you hear it, the soft rustle of wings. You look up, and the breath catches in your throat. There she is. She descends from the sky like a shadow, her great wings spread wide, shimmering in the dim light. Her face, though beautiful, is stern and ageless, her almond-shaped eyes glowing with ethereal light. A crown sits atop her head, a sun disk, encircled by the horns of Hathor, and around her neck, a collar of jewels glimmers in the fading light. Isis lands before you, silent, her presence overwhelming, almost too much for your mortal eyes to bear. She radiates power, an ancient and terrible strength, and you feel as if you could fall to your knees in reverence and terror all at once. You have come, she says, her voice soft and resonant. It is a statement, not a question. Yes, Great One, you whisper, bowing your head, unsure if you can even look upon her face much longer. Isis steps closer, her bare feet silent against the stone. She regards you for a long moment, her eyes searching yours as though she is measuring your worth, your resolve, your very soul. She steps closer, and the air around you grows heavy, dense. You feel her presence wrap around you, a mix of comfort and overwhelming force. Her hand extends, and she places her palm on your forehead. The touch is light, but sends a flood of visions and memories not your own. You see the birth of the world, the rise of the gods, and the endless cycle of life and death, all bound in her name. Now you are mine, Isis smiles, a slow, mysterious curve of her lip. She lifts her hand from your forehead, and in an instant the world around you seems to shift. The temple walls fade into darkness, and you are alone with her, standing in a place that feels beyond time and beyond space. The stars above burn brighter than you have ever seen, swirling in patterns that speak of ancient power and forgotten wisdom. "Remember this," she says, her voice low and intimate. "My power flows through you, and through you, the old ways will live again." And with that, she's gone. One moment she is there, solid, real, divine, and the next she vanishes like smoke on the wind, leaving you standing alone beneath the endless sky. And now, your true journey begins. Hello and welcome to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take a mythological girl and we do a bit of a deep dive. We're talking origin stories, we're talking all the best myths, and also have a little look at how those myths change and transform over time until we arrive in the here and now and see how she's still relevant today. If that sounds good to you, then you better stick around really, and make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. I have this week realised that the podcast actually has quite a few viewers over on YouTube, and I'm aware that when the podcast gets uploaded over there, it's just you guys staring at the logo of my podcast for a very long time. And I love my logo, I work very hard on it, but I wanted to ask if any of you that listen or watch over on YouTube, would you like to see some kind of video or sequence of photos alongside the audio for the podcast? Please do let me know in the comments, either on YouTube or if you're interested in watching something like that on YouTube, let me know in the comments wherever you're listening right now. Anyway, back to today's episode. So today we're heading on over to ancient Egypt for the very first time in the podcast, and we're talking about one of the most powerful and enduring figures in mythology, Isis. Queen of the gods, mother of magic, and a symbol of strength and resilience. Now, Isis's influence didn't stop at the temples of Egypt. She's left her mark across the world in ways that you might not expect. So throughout today's episode, we'll explore her origins in Egyptian mythology, her most famous stories, and where we can find her in modern pop culture. So buckle up, it's going to be a fascinating journey. I haven't given you a snack recommendation for a few weeks, so today I'm going to suggest a cup of tea and Pringles, preferably Pringles in, I don't know if any of you remember, but when you used to get lunch at school and you would take like a mini pot of Pringles, and I had a purple sparkly one. So if you've got one of those, put some Pringles in it, get a cup of tea, and let's go. To understand Isis, we need to go back to the dawn of ancient Egyptian civilization. Isis was known as Aset in Egyptian, which translates to Queen of the Throne, and this is reflected in her headdress, which is typically a throne. And she was originally a relatively minor goddess in the Old Kingdom period of Egypt, and she didn't have any temples in her own name, but her significance grew tremendously over time. And she eventually became a symbol of royal power, the protector of the pharaoh, and finally, the mother of all things magical. But who was Isis exactly? Well, there aren't actually any references to Isis before the 5th dynasty, which is around 2465 to 2325 BC. But she is mentioned many times in the pyramid texts, which are circa 2350 to 2100 BC. In fact, the only extensive contemporary descriptions of ancient Egyptian culture from the outside were made by classical Greek and Roman writers. Herodotus, sort of 5th century BC, remarked that the Egyptians were the most religious of people, and other significant classic sources include Plutarch's essay on Isis and Osiris from the 1st century CE, which gives the only known connected narrative of their myth. And there's also various other writers who spoke about the Isis cult as it spread through the Greco-Roman world. So again, here we see this mythological woman through the lens of a different culture. And we've seen this before, most notably with Medusa in our very first episode together. The myth of Isis was developed by the priests of one of the most ancient Egyptian cities, Heliopolis, and they were followers of the sun god, Ra. According to them, Isis was born into one of the most powerful and divine families in the Egyptian pantheon. Her father was Keb, the god of the earth, and her mother was Nut, the goddess of the sky. She had 3 siblings, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys, each playing a significant role in Egyptian mythology. Isis was also married to her brother Osiris, the god of the underworld, and it's through their marriage that Isis truly came into her own. Her association with the throne and her position as the mother of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, cemented her role as a protector of rulers. Over time, she transcended her role as just a goddess of Egypt, evolving into a figure who represented motherhood, magic, and healing across the Mediterranean world. And I'll tell you some of the myths surrounding Isis in just a moment. But first, let's talk about what Isis looked like, so you can really picture her in your mind's eye when I'm telling you these fascinating stories. Unless you're one of the people who can't actually visualize things, in which case I'm sorry, but worry not, as I will be leaving links in the show notes as per usual so you can take a little look for yourselves. And there's going to be some gems in the show notes. You'll see later on what I'm referring to. Isis was almost always depicted as a beautiful woman. She's usually wearing more traditional Egyptian clothing, such as light dresses, with a knot called a tayet in the middle. And this knot was actually symbolic of Isis and might have represented eternity or immortality, or even a power over fate. And she's often depicted wearing a crown of cow horns and a solar disc. In some images this is small, and some it's quite large, so you can take your pick on how large you like your solar disc. Egyptian gods and goddesses often took on many forms, including that of animals. So Isis is often represented as a number of animals, including scorpions, birds, a sow, or a cow. Another image of Isis which is fairly common is her nursing her child Horus. These images were brought to life in statues quite commonly during the Greek period, when terracottas of Isis were popular, and they were called Isis lactans. During the early Roman period, Isis became entwined with the goddess of love, Aphrodite. This blending of the two resulted in terracottas showing the goddess in some more revealing poses and exposing her sexual organs. And it's been said that followers of Isis might have replicated such poses and revealed themselves if they wanted to conceive. What an image. If you are one of those people that can't imagine things in your head, you're probably feeling quite lucky right now. So now you can envisage Isis a little bit better, let's jump into some stories all about her. There are many myths and stories involving Isis, but perhaps the most famous of these is the tale of Isis and Osiris, a story of love, tragedy, and resurrection that has resonated throughout history. As always, there are multiple versions and translations of this tale, so you might have heard it slightly differently to how I'm going to tell it, but I'm picking the one that I like the most. Now, I want you to imagine a time when gods ruled not only the skies, but the earth itself. Among them were two siblings, Osiris and Isis, though their bond went far deeper than blood. Osiris was the god king of Egypt, wise and just, beloved by all who lived under his rule. His queen and sister Isis was a goddess of immense power and magic, known for her wisdom and her unshakable loyalty. Together, they ruled a prosperous land where order prevailed and the people thrived. But as with many great stories, peace never lasts forever. For Isis and Osiris had a brother, Seth. And while Osiris was a force of balance, Seth was a god of chaos. His heart burned with jealousy, for he desired the throne and the power that Osiris held, and so a dark plan began to take root in Seth's mind. One night he invited Osiris to a grand feast, claiming to be in honour of his brother. But this was no ordinary celebration. Seth had secretly crafted an ornate chest, one that was sized perfectly to Osiris's body. During the feast, Seth casually mentioned that whoever could fit inside the chest could claim it as a gift. Osiris, trusting his brother, stepped inside the chest, and at that moment, Seth's true intentions were revealed. Is it just me that thinks this seems shady? Like if somebody asked me to climb into a box that seemed to precisely fit my body, I don't think I'd do it. Mind you, that would not make for a very interesting story, so I guess we can be grateful that Osiris didn't catch on. Once Osiris was inside, Seth slammed the lid shut, sealing Osiris inside the chest. He and his followers took the chest to the Nile, casting it out into the river. Osiris, the beloved king of Egypt, was dead. His body drifted down the Nile, disappearing into the unknown. But the story does not end there, for while Seth seized power and plunged the land into turmoil, Isis refused to accept her husband's fate. She would not rest until she had found Osiris and restored him. With the help of her sister Nephis and the god Anubis, Isis searched across Egypt. Her journey took her to distant lands, through deserts and marshes, and finally to the shores of Byblos, where she found the chest containing Osiris's body trapped in the branches of a great tree. Gently, she freed him and brought him back to Egypt. But the work was far from over. Osiris's body had decayed, and Set had found out that Isis had retrieved it, and fearing her magic, he took the body and chopped it into 14 pieces, scattering them all across the land. And it seemed impossible. How could anyone recover Osiris now? But Isis was a goddess of relentless determination. She transformed herself into a bird, soaring over the Nile and the vast deserts, collecting the pieces of Osiris's body, all except his penis, which according to some myths was eaten by fish in the Nile. What a lovely snack for them. Isis placed each fragment together, using her powerful magic to reconstruct him, and with the help of Anubis, the god of embalming, they bound Osiris in the sacred wrappings and created the first mummy. But Isis wasn't finished. She turned into a kite, a bird, not the other type of kite because they didn't have those in ancient Egypt, and whilst in kite form, she used her powers along with the powers of Thoth and uttered ancient, powerful words. A spell so potent that it could bridge the realms of the living and the dead. And as her voice filled the air, Osiris stirred. He opened his eyes, resurrected, but not as the ruler of the living. Osiris had become something even greater. He rose as the god of the underworld, the judge of the dead, and the keeper of the afterlife. But before he departed to the underworld, Osiris and Isis shared one final moment. From their union, Isis conceived a son, Horus, who would one day challenge Set for the throne of Egypt and restore balance to the land. You might be wondering, how did this happen if his penis was missing? And I'm here to tell you that in the absence of the original, Isis crafted a phallus herself. In some stories, she cut off her own thumb to do this, and in some it was made of gold. Whatever it was, it must have worked because, well, Horus was made. And you can actually see this on the corn mummy, which is displayed in an exhibition in the Minneapolis Institute of Art. But if you don't want to go all the way to Minneapolis, I will leave a link in the show notes so you can take a little look. I told you, the show notes are a treasure trove. Please do go and have a look. Osiris's journey was not the end, but the beginning of a cycle, one of death and resurrection, a story echoed in the very rhythm of the Nile, in the rising and the setting of the sun. And Isis, the devoted wife and sister, became a symbol of power, love, and unwavering faith. This tale of Isis and Osiris is not just a story of gods and magic, it's a reflection on how ancient Egyptians viewed life and death and the possibility of rebirth. It's no wonder that their story has endured for thousands and thousands of years, inspiring myths and art and even rituals that shaped an entire civilization. And in theme with this myth, pharaohs began to be buried in mummified form with erect penises to emulate the resurrection of Osiris. Another of the best-known Egyptian myths is the story of Isis and Ra. So Ra was no ordinary god, he was the god. He was the creator of everything, the sun that crossed the sky, the ruler of both gods and men. Every day he travelled across the heavens in his solar bark, bringing light to the world, and every night he descended into the underworld, battling the forces of chaos to ensure the sun would rise again. Ra was wise and ancient, his knowledge boundless, and his power unmatched. But there was one goddess who sought something greater than she had. Isis, a goddess of immense power and magic and intellect, was not content with being just a powerful deity. She knew that true power lay in knowledge, and there was one secret that even she did not possess: Ra's true name. In ancient Egyptian belief, names were essential to a person's being. To know someone's true name was to have control over them, and to erase someone's name after death was to destroy that person in the afterlife. A god's name was more than just a word. It was the essence of their being, the source of their strength. And Ra's true name had been hidden for eons, locked away deep within him, known only to himself. Isis had power over words and learned the names of all things so that she could in time become as great as Ra. And eventually the only name that she didn't know was Ra's secret name. And so, using her clever mind, she devised a plan. You see, Ra was getting a bit old. In each day, as he journeyed across the sky, he sometimes let his guard down. He slacked a little bit, and his divine saliva would fall to the earth. So basically, he was an old man, and his jowls were drooling all over the earth beneath him. And Isis caught some of this drool and used it to craft a serpent a deadly viper, with poison as potent as the magic she infused into it. She left this serpent in Ra's path, and when he walked the earth, the serpent struck, and the venom coursed through Ra's divine veins, and for the first time, the god felt great pain. And it was not a mortal wound, for no weapon could harm Ra. This was different. This was magic, and it burned through him with unbearable intensity. He tried to heal himself, but the poison was too strong. His body faltered, and he fell to the ground. In desperation, Ra called out to the other gods for help. They gathered around him, but none could cure him. The gods were powerless before the venom that Isis had created. Then Isis stepped forward. With a calm voice, she said, "Great Ra, I can heal you, but I must know the source of your strength to do so. I must know your true name." Ra hesitated. To give Isis his true name would mean giving her control over him. But the pain was unbearable, and his strength was fading. He had no choice. Slowly, Ra whispered his name to Isis, revealing the secret that had been hidden for ages. With that, Isis gained the knowledge she sought. She spoke the words of power, and the poison fled from Ra's body. He was restored, but from that moment on, Isis held a power over the great sun god that no one else possessed. Isis had not only saved Ra's life, but she had also elevated herself to a level of power almost equal to his. She didn't use the name to harm him, that was never her goal. But now she stood as a goddess of unmatched wisdom and influence, revered even among the gods. Her cunning and determination and mastery of magic had brought her what she desired most. Not just power, but control over the very forces that govern the cosmos. It was through this tale that Isis became known as the goddess who could outwit even the most powerful, using her intellect and magic to achieve what seemed impossible: big brain energy. But this story is more than just a tale of ambition. It's a reminder of the lengths one can go in pursuit of knowledge and the responsibilities that come with that knowledge. Isis didn't overthrow Ra. Instead, she earned a place beside him, embodying the balance between wisdom and strength, magic and might. The story of Isis and Ra is one of the many ways that the ancient Egyptians explained the forces that shaped their world, and how even the greatest of beings were bound by secrets and vulnerability. It's a story that resonates with the idea that knowledge itself is power, and that sometimes, to gain it, one must be willing to face the most dangerous challenges. Although Isis was a beloved and vital goddess for ancient Egyptians, her power and influence was not contained to Egypt alone. Over time, worship of Isis evolved far beyond the boundaries of Egypt. In the early days of ancient Egypt, Isis began as a secondary figure really to her husband Osiris. She was primarily seen as the ideal mother and wife. Her myth centered around her dedication to her husband and protection of their son. She was a goddess of healing and magic, capable of resurrecting the dead and bending the rules of the universe. But it was her role as protector of the pharaohs and her association with the throne itself that truly cemented her status among Egyptian people. And after thousands of years of worship, she was transformed into the queen of the universe, an embodiment of cosmic order. And as Egypt began to interact with neighbouring cultures through trade and conquest, something remarkable happened, and Isis's influence expanded far beyond Egypt's borders. In the later periods of Egyptian history, especially during the Greco-Roman era, her role shifted. She was no longer just a protector of Egyptian rulers, but became a more universal symbol of divine power and salvation. In fact, by the Roman period, she was believed to control the power of fate itself. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, he and his successors, the Ptolemies, integrated Isis into their own Hellenistic traditions. They promoted her as a goddess not just of Egypt, but one who could be worshipped by all people. In this era, Isis's image started to change. She was increasingly depicted wearing Greek-style clothing, holding symbols that represented not just motherhood, but dominion over the sea and the sky. Her power became more universal, representing the cycles of nature, the mysteries of life and death, and the connection between the mortal and divine realms. And it was during the Roman Empire that Isis's influence reached its peak. Temples dedicated to her were built across the Mediterranean world, in Greece, Italy, Gaul, and even as far as Britannia. Her worshippers saw her as a goddess who transcended borders, capable of bringing prosperity and safety to all, regardless of nationality or status. But what set Isis apart truly from many other ancient deities was the personal connection her followers felt with her. Unlike many gods of the time who were distant and unapproachable, Isis was believed to be a compassionate goddess, one who listened to the prayers of everyday people. She wasn't a queen of the gods. She was a saviour, a protector, a mother figure for everyone. And this made her incredibly popular, especially among the poor and marginalised. As this cult of Isis spread, rituals dedicated to her became more elaborate. One of the most significant was the Navigium Isidis, or the Festival of the Ship of Isis, celebrated in Roman ports to ensure safe sea voyages. This ritual is a testament to how Isis's role as a goddess of protection and fertility expanded into new domains like the sea and travel, further increasing her appeal. And the cult of Isis was so influential that even when the Roman Empire began to embrace Christianity, Isis worship continued for centuries. In fact, many scholars believe that early depictions of the Virgin Mary holding the infant Jesus were inspired by earlier images of Isis cradling Horus. The themes of motherhood and protection and salvation were so deeply embedded in the Isis myth that they resonated with the early Christian community. Though her temples were eventually closed and the cult faded with the rise of Christianity, the legacy of Isis remains. Her symbol, her myths, and her influence have left an indelible mark on the history of spirituality. From a goddess who ruled over the Nile, to a deity who became a symbol of universal salvation, Isis's journey through history shows how myths can evolve and adapt to new cultures and times. And I think Isis probably has adapted the best out of all the mythological women we've spoken about so far. She has really deeply ingrained herself in other cultures and crossed borders effortlessly. Her story is one of survival and transformation, enduring influence, proving that even in a changing world, the power of belief and the gods we turn to for comfort and guidance can endure across the ages. Isis was one of the most important deities in ancient Egyptian mythology, but she continues to resonate today in modern pop culture, symbolizing power and mystery and feminine divinity. Known as a goddess of magic, motherhood, and protection, Isis has found her way into various forms of media, often representing themes of rebirth, mysticism, and strength. One of the most notable references to Isis in modern culture is actually in comic books. In the DC Comics universe, Isis first appeared as a superhero in the 1970s TV show The Secrets of Isis. Here, she was portrayed as a modern-day schoolteacher who transforms into the goddess when calling upon the power of Isis, using her abilities to protect humanity. And I can't urge you enough to look this show up. The pose that she does is quite possibly the single most awkward thing I've ever seen in my life. It's a bit of a hands on the hip power pose moment, but it's awkward. I actually watched the first episode of this show, and it was highly enjoyable. It was kind of like wholesome fun. She literally flies through the air. She fights crime. She calls upon the Sphinx to expose this man's lies, and this is only episode 1. So I'm going to leave you the link to watch this pure icon in the show notes. It's really worth. It's 22 minutes. It's worth the 22 minutes of your time that it will take to watch this. It's brilliant. So iconic was she in this show that she actually later crossed over into the comic books, becoming a powerful figure alongside other myth-based heroes like Shazam. DC's depiction of Isis often highlights her ancient roots, emphasising her connection to nature, wisdom, and justice. And her role didn't stop with DC. We see references to Isis pop up in shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where her myth is subtly woven into the themes of resurrection and sacrifice. The character Willow, after her journey into dark magic, performs rituals invoking Isis to help restore life, paralleling the goddess's role in the resurrection of her husband Osiris in Egyptian mythology. And this taps into Isis's ancient association with magic and life cycles, translating it into more modern storytelling about personal growth and empowerment. Isis also appears in video games, and I'm pretty sure literally every woman we've spoken about so far on the show has been a video game character, which is pretty cool. But Isis appears in the video game Smite, a multiplayer online battle arena, and she's one of the playable gods. Here, Isis's powers are portrayed through a blend of her traditional associations with healing and mystical energy, while her design and combat abilities reflect modern interpretations of power dynamics in gaming. She can summon protective spells and destructive winds, representing her duality as a nurturer and a formidable warrior. And I've read the Smite wiki page for Isis, and her backstory pretty much tracks exactly the tale of Isis and Osiris. It's quite accurate. I will say though, you can tell that she's been created for the male gaze. There are many skins that you can get for this character. I've looked at them all, and literally every skin you can get is provocative to say the least. I could go off on a very big tangent about women in video games, but I will not, because you're not here for that. You're here to talk about Isis. In the realm of literature, Isis frequently symbolises the divine feminine in contemporary spiritual movements, particularly in works related to goddess worship and feminist spirituality. Books like The Red Tent by Anita Diamant indirectly reference Isis through themes of women's strength, motherhood, and the sacredness of birth and rebirth. Her figure serves as a reminder of the enduring archetype of the powerful, life-giving woman, influencing modern feminist interpretations of ancient mythology. Is this maybe another one for the Ladies of Lore book club? I think so. We're adding it. I should actually start this book club at this point. There's a new book every week for you all to read. And Isis also pops up in music, and she's inspired quite a lot of artists. Notably, there is a song named Isis by Bob Dylan, which it doesn't directly relate to the Egyptian goddess, but it does evoke the mystique and allure often associated with her name. And the lyrics of this song explore themes of love and journey and rebirth and transformation, all common motifs connected to Isis's mythic narrative. And finally, much like the Morrigan, Isis remains an important and revered figure in modern paganism, particularly in neo-pagan and goddess-centred spiritual movements. Her worship today reflects her ancient roles as a goddess of magic, healing and motherhood, and the protection of the natural world. Neo-pagans and modern followers of goddess traditions often incorporate Isis into their rituals, and they view her as a symbol of divine feminine power, balance, and transformation. And people who follow modern pagan paths often invoke Isis's protective and nurturing qualities. So the rituals that they do might include prayer, invocations, or meditations that call upon her wisdom and strength. And offerings to Isis are often made, and these include things like flowers, water to represent the Nile, and candles to symbolise her light and magic. Many goddess-focused spiritual groups celebrate Isis as an archetype of the divine feminine, and this includes honouring her as a symbol of motherhood, fertility, and life. In these traditions, she's often connected with other goddesses, such as Demeter or Inanna, as part of a broader understanding of the universal feminine. Some modern pagans, particularly those in the Kemetic or Egyptian Reconstructionist tradition, seek to revive ancient Egyptian religious practices, and they worship Isis in a way that more closely follows the customs of ancient Egypt, and that includes things such as traditional festivals dedicated to her, like the Feast of Lights, which honours her role as the light bringer. Isis is often syncretised with other deities in contemporary spirituality. Like we said earlier, she's often associated with figures like the Virgin Mary. That's mainly due to her role as mother and protector. And this blending allows worshippers to draw from a wider array of spiritual influences. And it also links back, like I said, to what we said about Christianity earlier in the episode. And some groups have created modern-day temples of Isis. One notable example is the Fellowship of Isis. And this is an organisation who are dedicated to honouring lots of different goddesses from different cultures. And Isis is often actually at the centre of their practices. And they conduct rituals, teach sacred texts, and hold celebrations that honour Isis and her mythological significance. I've been on their website. Their headquarters is a beautiful castle in Ireland, of all places. And they have a manifesto. And we haven't really had an extract on this episode yet, so I'm going to read you a small extract from their manifesto. The Fellowship accepts religious toleration and is not exclusivist. Members are free to maintain other religious allegiances. Membership is open to all of every religion, tradition, and race. Children, listed as Children of Isis, are welcomed, subject to parental consent. The animal family of Isis accepts members, animal and bird friends, through centres. The Fellowship believes in the promotion of love, beauty, and abundance. No encouragement is given to asceticism. The Fellowship seeks to develop friendliness, psychic gifts, happiness, and compassion for all lives. The Druid clan of Dana develops nature's psychic gifts. Do you know what? It actually doesn't sound that bad. It actually sounds quite cool. And I love that my dogs could also be followers of Isis. I bet the ancient Egyptians never thought that they'd have a couple of schnauzer children of Isis. In these ways, Isis continues to be a powerful spiritual figure in modern paganism, embodying timeless themes of protection, wisdom, and the divine feminine. So it's clear that Isis is more than just a relic of ancient Egypt. She's a symbol that continues to evolve even today. Whether in comics, television, video games, literature, or modern-day pagan worship, her presence in pop culture reflects our ongoing fascination with ancient myths and the timeless archetypes they represent. Isis's story is one of resilience, transformation, and power. From the banks of the Nile to the streets of Rome, from ancient mysterious cults to modern feminist movements, her influence has spanned thousands of years. She's a goddess who's outlasted kingdoms, survived cultural shifts, and adapted to the changing world. Whether we look at her as the mother of magic, the protector of the throne, or the symbol of divine motherhood, Isis remains one of the most captivating figures in mythology. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey down the Nile, into the myth, and into the magic of Isis. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out some of our previous episodes where I take you through the stories of some of the most amazing and badass women in mythology and folklore. I would love to hear your thoughts about this episode and about Isis, so please do feel free to leave me a comment and leave me a little review. And if you've really enjoyed the podcast, let somebody else know who might want to hear about Osiris's missing penis. I'll be back next week to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of women in mythology and folklore. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.